today we're going to add some context to some very turbulent times in the petroleum industry. So I want to preface this by saying it is Thursday afternoon, March 19th, and we're going to have a conversation about what's going on with oil prices, what's been going on with gas prices, what it means to retailers. And to have that conversation, there's no one better than the chief oil analyst from OPIS. Denton has joined us frequently and found a little time in his schedule today, which is, I'm sure, chaotic. So thanks for joining us today, Denton.
Yeah, Jeff, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I thought today might be a little quieter than yesterday. It turns out it's not. Things have accelerated in the Middle East. Why don't you just give a quick rundown of where we are? We're on the cusp of $4 gas as we talk on Thursday, March 19th, and all signs are pointing to continuing upward pressure on prices. Just give us a rundown of where we are.
Sure. Well, right now the national average is right around 389. So yeah, it's a matter of days, possibly even hours before that national average reaches the $4 a gallon level. Like we discussed before, it'll probably be $4 by the time $4 or more by the time this podcast gets released. Really, what happened on March 18th was just a huge escalation in the obvious conflict taking place between the U.S. and Israel against Iran, when Israel bombed the South Pars gas field, which is one of the largest in the world, and the retaliation from Iran. So basically, what is happening, it's almost like a symmetric attacks. You attack our gas, we're going to attack your gas. You attack our refineries, we're going to attack your refineries. That's what's been going on with the back and forth between the countries. Now, we all know the Strait of Hormuz is closed. That should remain so for the foreseeable future until there's a resolution. Who knows when that's going to happen? I mean, our assumptions are this is probably a 6-week event. What are we, 3 weeks in now? So another 3 weeks possibly, but then you have the recovery. There's the backlog of ships that needs to be not just moved out of the strait, but back into the Persian Gulf to fill up with oil or refined products, etc. And then you have, the long road of recovery and damage repair. LNG, we were talking about this doesn't really pertain for retailers, but it does give some context, is that liquefied natural gas, there was the talk of a significant glut between, say, 2027 and 2030. That's gone. There is no more glut. A lot of last year and early this year, there was talk of an oil supply glut, where more supply than demand. That's gone as well. And the question becomes, once this is finished, did some countries have to close down oil production facilities and production wells so fast that they did permanent damage to the wells where, and I'll just make up numbers. Saudi Arabia is making 10 million barrels a day of oil. I think it's actually in that neighborhood. Did they damage those wells so bad where they can only get back to about 9 million barrels a day? That remains to be seen. But this is not like anything we've ever seen before. You could go back to 2022 with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which incidentally is still going on. I think the thing that kind of, for me, equates closely to this, and it's more on the opposite side, was the 2020 pandemic with COVID and the demand reaction and how prices responded to that. This is the opposite, where prices are responding to supply. The U.S. is in a unique position. I don't think the U.S. will have a supply problem. I think the U.S. will have a price problem. I spoke at something recently, and there weren't many people in the room. And talking to one of the organizers, they were surprised. And I said, well, over the last 2 years, you haven't had much of any movement in oil prices, or at least significant movement. Same thing with retail gasoline prices. And I said, no one cares about fuel until someone cares about fuel. So now I'm going to use my own quote in my presentations going forward. So don't be surprised when you hear me say that at Next SOI in a couple weeks. But yeah, that's kind of where we stand. So, like I said, we expect the conflict as it currently stands to be a 6 week event. The recovery, the cleanup of the black backlog of ships and everything, is probably going to take another 12 weeks or so. That takes us to the middle of June. So we're looking at significant issues as we traverse through the calendar. But I would say the United States is mostly insulated on supply. The problem is Asia is not. And this is a global market, and this is an event where it's the tide that lifts all boats.
And of course, we're in the spring transition to summer blend fuel, which that fuel typically is 25 cents or so more expensive to produce. And usually in that period, there's about a 50% increase because of other variables in addition to the cost of the product. So we're in the midst of that. And even if this conflict and everything were to be resolved tomorrow, there's still that going on. So unfortunately, the timing is not optimum, but it never is for something like this. And we're just talking about oil and gas. We're not talking about the broader issues going on or politics or anything like that. But in looking at, you already answered one of the questions that I think is common as a myth, I guess, if you will. Roughly 100 million barrels a day produced in the world, and roughly 100 million barrels is used. That's where you want it. Sometimes there's an imbalance of 1 or 2 million barrels per day. You have a glut or you have a shortage, and that affects things. U.S. produces about 60% of that, roughly. And then there's imports, exports, and all that. So it's not like the U.S. keeps all that oil. They ship out some, they get some back. But the one question that you'll see on social media is, wait, we produce the oil in the Strait does not come to the U.S., so why are U.S. gas prices going up? And I think you already answered that, but answer that again, because that's a super important point.
Yeah, and I'll start this by saying that over the past decade, 2 decades, the U.S. has really weaned itself off of Middle Eastern oil. So at the peak, we're bringing in about 2.7 million barrels a day from the Persian Gulf. Now it's down to about 6 to 800,000 barrels a day. So obviously a huge drop. And that's largely because Saudi Arabia owns a refinery on the Gulf Coast. Some Iraqi oils interact really well with some of our refineries. So it's a nice match there. But why are gas prices going up when we aren't necessarily exposed? Well, it's like I said, this is a global market. And think of it, let's say we have 3 buckets in front of us, buckets of water. One is North America, South America. The other one is Europe. The other one is Asia. Well, the Asia one is dropping. Now we have to take water from those other buckets to balance things out. So now, we live in a capitalist society. So now you're seeing exports of refined products go to places like Australia because they're so desperate for product right now.
And they'll pay more.
I think 2020 and COVID gave governments maybe the playbook of how to respond to this. So a couple of examples I've seen recently. Sri Lanka and Pakistan have both gone to 4-day work weeks, and they're encouraging people to conserve fuel, not travel if you don't have to.
Because of this.
Because of tight supplies and tightening supplies. And I wouldn't be surprised if more developed countries in Asia, like Japan or South Korea, maybe follow suit or encourage companies to let their employees work from home to reduce demand. So this needs to be a demand response globally, and that's probably the only thing that would set prices kind of straight. So I'll give you a perfect example of some of the desperation out there. So there's a crude oil. It's called Alaska North Slope, ANS. Alaskan production is again a fraction of what it used to be. I think it's probably about 4, 5, 600,000 barrels a day. But Alaska North Slope crude trades normally against a Brent crude oil futures calendar month average. Last month or before this all went down, it was about $1.10 over. Recently, it's traded at $8.30 over. So that what I suspect is refiners in South Korea, in Japan, and places like that, desperate for a crude oil that they could get their hands on. Because anything coming through the strait, and we've seen some stories about boats trickling through, but that's desperation type numbers. When the premium goes up 8 times, you're desperate.
Yeah. And I want to go through like the options that the government has. And as you were saying, supply is constricted by roughly 20%. And I'm not even going to address this on social media, people saying like, oh, well, they should just build a pipeline. They should just truck it. They should do, it's mountainous. It's a little difficult to build a pipeline in 1 week and, all that other stuff. So forget that social media. We've long said the president doesn't control gas prices. There's very few things at his disposal, any president, to affect prices. Now, there are some levers to pull, and some of them have already been pulled. Like, for example, the withdrawals from the petroleum reserves. There was a coordinated announcement that there would be reserves pulled from both the U.S. SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and EU. And that totals, about 4 million barrels total, I believe?
400 million.
400 million, which is about 4 days' demand.
Yeah. Yeah, based on that 100 number you use, it's probably a little bit more than that, but I think that's a nice even round number, and it's close enough to reality.
Yeah. So there's something there, but it's really how might that tamp down the speculation and how crude oil is traded. So it's what is actual in adding to the market and what is a sign that you're addressing the market that I think these levers are seeking to do.
And again, we'll talk about the U.S. portion of the SPR because we're contributing the largest portion.
Right, about
172
right?
million barrels.
Yeah.
Over 120 days. It works out to be about 1.4 million barrels a day. So again, when our refiners run about 16 million barrels a day, it's really a drop in the bucket. So my suspicion is, and this is a loan, so you're going to have to give back that oil. Plus, the Trump administration is looking for extra barrels to help refill and restock the SPR. So I think it's a 20%. So if you take, 100 million barrels, you're going to have to give back 120. Chances are, once those barrels are released, they're going to be put on a ship and exported to another country that needs it desperately. So one way that could kind of tamp down prices, particularly for WTI, is you would sell the front end of the market. So right now, that's about $97.75, and then buy the back end, so you have that kind of premium worked in. Now, if you went out and did that, say Jeff Leonard's trading company moves oil around the world, well, you could do that, but what if you don't win the bid? Well, now you just shorted the oil market at a time when it looks like it's going to continue to go up. So kind of be careful there. It's, again, Jeff, you said it yourself, 400 million barrels is basically 4% of daily demand, and it's not coming out all at once.
Yeah.
So again, it's a Band-Aid on a shotgun wound. Sorry for that image I may have put in everyone's head.
It's helpful, but it's we have a 20% deficit to clear up.
Sure.
Now, another thing, just announced a temporary removal or whatever, relief from the Jones Act.
Mm-hmm.
And we could probably spend the rest of the podcast explaining what the Jones Act is, but basically involves U.S. flag ships that are staffed significantly by U.S., and it goes back 100 years. But the idea is this would allow a little bit more movement of oil. I've seen at the low end, it might help by a penny a gallon. At the high end, it might help by 60 cents a gallon. They're probably somewhere in between. That is reality, and it might be some relief, but it's only a 60-day stay. So there's a little there. That's another lever that has been pulled. Saw yesterday, Wednesday, the 18th, Georgia said that they were going to do 60-day gas tax relief for the state. I would imagine that's the first of many states that may do this. And I think the concern here is obviously for retailers is when something like this happens, people have binoculars on and they're looking at the station. Why didn't that station drop its gas price by that exact amount? Because they're supposed to. And it's more complicated than that. And that's going to be quite an education issue if more states or the federal government do tax relief.
Yeah, no, and again, to your point, I think that's one of the levers, and a very easy lever to pull. You mentioned Georgia. Georgia did that in 2022. I believe Florida did as well, and there were, I think, one or two other states that did something like that. I live in high tax New Jersey, so there's no chance that something like that is going to happen. But that is certainly a lever that can be pulled by the administration. The Jones Act, we'll talk about that for a second. And, real quick, U.S. built, U.S. flagged, U.S. manned crew. These are the only ships that can move from one U.S. port to another. Waiving that allows for quote unquote cheaper internationally flagged ships, but based on what we're seeing in the shipping world, they're not that much cheaper than the Jones Act. So of that range of a penny to 60 cents, it's probably closer to that lower end of the range, unfortunately. Earlier on, you mentioned the moving into the low RVP season for gasoline, and for lack of a better term, summer grade gasoline.
Yeah.
If the Trump administration or the EPA goes ahead and waives those requirements, it would add more supply to the market. It would have, I think, the tax holiday, just because it's a fixed number, would have probably the biggest impact. But when you're looking at, allowing for an extension of the current kind of winter grade gasoline that's being sold at retail, you're just looking at additional butane going into butane going into the gasoline blend. So it adds maybe 150, 200,000 barrels a day more. So it's not a huge increase and probably wouldn't have that much of an impact, but it probably would help bring gasoline prices down a little bit. Let's call that one, I don't know, 5 to 10 cents of help. And, when you're looking at $4 a gallon, guess what? Any little kind of discount that you could possibly get your hands on is gonna help. There's been talk of, making E15 more readily available, but then you have the issue with, compatibility with the equipment at retail stations. So all these fixes, other than, probably waiving the summer grade requirements and the gas tax holiday, are quick. Those are ones that could be implemented now, and they could help pretty close to right away. Everything else, I hear talk now of, the administration is really pushing this new refinery that's going to be built in Brownsville, Texas. Well, you don't build a refinery in 2 months, so that's nice. It's a nice talking point, but let's be real here. It's going to take years for that thing to be done.
So, and also in moving fuel around, there's also things DOT could waive some of the truck weight restrictions, and maybe there's temporary relief in just moving things around or taking a slice here or slice there. But really, those are the only levers that have some ability to moderate prices or to keep them from moving as fast as they could move if all of this stays. Now, if you look at EIA's short-term energy outlook from just a month or so ago, they said prices this year, oil prices would average $55 a barrel. We're at double that as we speak right now, at least on the futures market. Don't know where it's going to go. So we don't know where any of this is going to go. But you had mentioned, how do we decrease demand? And interesting that some countries are already looking at voluntary, encouraging people to stay home. Is there anything that you see that could trigger something, say, more widespread, like what Nixon did in 1971, price controls, or rationing, like I believe most recently was with Superstorm Sandy in New Jersey and New York, where you had odd even rationing? Do you think these are on the table or being discussed right now?
Probably not, just because we don't necessarily have the same supply problems that other countries do. Again, gasoline inventories are above the 5-year average. They're above where they were last year. Gasoline inventories in the U.S. right now are quite comfortable. Diesel's a little bit tighter. jet fuel as well. Those are ones that I'm watching really closely, especially with the diesel average now above $5 a gallon. And Jeff, to your point, there's some things that you could do with trucking, but keep in mind that's going to come with a fuel surcharge, a higher fuel surcharge, I should say. So I am happy to see that it's being reported that the government is not looking at an export ban of crude oil, because that would just be one of the most foolish things you could possibly do. You would hurt the producers in West Texas and North Dakota and New Mexico. But not only that, U.S. inventories would fill up so fast, they would have to reduce production. So it's the whole cut your nose off to spite your face type of thing. Price controls never work. I think we've seen that before. If you do try and control the price, well, then we're just going to, the industry, whatever it is, it could be oil, gasoline, widgets, I don't know, beef jerky, whatever. Well, if you're going to try and control the price, we're going to produce less. And eventually we're going to be hurt. And all of a sudden you're going to have a shortage of anything going on. It's, similar to California trying to control the price of gasoline. They've tried to put in a maximum margin for refiners, and they're trying to implement storage requirements. These are all things that aren't, at the end of the day, they're not going to work. And in fact, they're probably going to end up hurting more so than they end up helping. So again, maybe it's just that I'm too much of a capitalist, but I feel like price controls never work.
And if you Google Nixon 1971 price controls, they were super popular at first because it's, oh wow, prices aren't going up, and it's like, wait, I'm not getting a raise. And then they became super unpopular, and it was a pretty rapid rise and fall on that one. Now everything is in flux. You've set some great context. Actually two final questions. First is, I know you've talked to a lot of people. You've talked to and I should have said, like, OPIS provides numbers AAA. So when we talk about OPIS and their finger on the pulse, there's no one that has a better finger on the pulse. You've been doing a lot of interviews with reporters. Is there anything that you're hearing from reporters or others that relates to what retailers need to think about? Are reporters getting the issue that this is an oil issue and that retailers are not benefiting? Are there any watch-outs that you're hearing in discussions that, hey, we need to have an explanation for what's going on at $4 or something higher?
Well, I think 2022 really did help a lot because we had this rapid rise in prices as well. And I think the general population, wow, I made it just sound like jail here, but sorry about that. But the population in general, let's say it that way instead. They've learned they're not as, the general public is not as dumb as you might think. They know now. And again, I'd like to think I've had a little bit of a hand in that over the years, but they know the difference between winter grade and summer grade gasoline. They know the formulation changes, and it's more difficult and more expensive to make in a time where you have, more demand. But, generally in talking to reporters and TV stations and radio stations, et cetera, I don't think the charges of, oh, we're getting gouged by this, guy who owns a gas station on the corner, he's taking advantage of a situation. No, he's just pricing in his the whole fact of replacement costs really had come to light in 2022 just because we had the rapid rise in prices. So I think there's a bit of a better understanding of how that works. Now, they don't understand everything of how it works. And to be fair, I don't understand everything of how it works. I have a very good idea and I can explain it well. But I'm sure there's a piece or two of probably, a detail or two that I'd be missing. But in the end, people understand that, hey, this retailer has tanks underground here. There's fuel in it. I know he paid probably less for it, but now he's worried about what he has to pay next time he has to fill those tanks. And, one of the things I've been hearing is, and this was early on, it may still be the case, but with the way prices have been moving, there's been retailers doing half loads just to make sure not only that their stations stay as full as possible, but also to get ahead of the next round of price increases. So, but I think in general, the public has become a little bit more in tune, lenient, if you will, on the accusations of this retailer is gouging me. They understand a little bit better than they did at some time. Now, granted, you still have the people out there who say, well, if the Keystone XL pipeline was built, these prices would not be what they were. And, you explain to them that when you say to them, well, which Keystone pipeline are you talking about? They're like, the one that didn't get built. I was like, or the one that's currently running at full capacity. Then they just give you a blank stare. So we're getting there. We're getting there in educating the public.
Yeah, stay away from social media. Focus on the facts. Listen to people like Denton. And Denton, you had mentioned that you're going to be at the one of the speakers at the next State of the Industry Summit in Chicago or Schaumburg, suburb of Chicago, next month in April. Don't forget to register. I remember last year, pretty much every speaker, including you, went up on stage saying, I finalized my presentation an hour ago. I'm afraid it's out of date. And that was because of the uncertainty related to the tariffs. Sorry to break it to you, but it's going to be the same thing this year.
Yeah.
You're going to be presentation an hour before you get up there.
That's right. Yes. And again, you guys like them early too. So
I will talk to people here. We'll take the latest information. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And then maybe, we're going to be in one of the Chicago suburbs, but maybe we'll make our own John Hughes movie out there.
Okay, we'll take the day off, except then you can't do your presentation.
That's it.
Denton, thank you as always. You're a great asset to what we do in our industry. And thanks for being a friend of the Convenience Matters podcast and being available on a super busy day.
No, my pleasure. Thanks. Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.